Welcome, everyone. I'm Mayor Leila Riazi here in Cheverly. Thank you for joining us on a rainy Saturday morning and taking time out of your day. Before we go ahead and get started with this third in the series of air quality monitoring workshops, would just like to draw some attention to how you can navigate for today, and then also just a caution if we were to be in a situation where there's inappropriate interference or behavior um, on this Zoom. For starters, we really value the safety, security, and don't want any situation that would cause harm to any participants in this workshop. We're going to be keeping an eye. If we need to remove someone, we'll seek to do so immediately. If it seems that we are unable to maintain security or control of this Zoom, we may choose to shut down this Zoom and send out information about how you can rejoin. We also may determine that we can't continue with the workshop, and then we would send out information for rescheduling for a future date and time. Ultimately, what we hope to do is if there is any sort of interference that we are able to take action and to continue. But we also understand if you individually feel the need to step away, because we don't want anybody to be in a situation in which they feel uncomfortable or in which they experience harm. Now, as far as going through and using the tools today for us to be able to communicate with each other, you'll notice that there is a question and answer section at the bottom of your screen. And that is one way for you to ask and have your questions answered. You also should have a raise hand feature, or depending upon how yours is set up, you may see that at the bottom of your screen. You may also see that next to your name. If you look at where your name is listed, you may also, depending upon what version you have, see that at the bottom of the list of participants today. So if you have any question about accessing the raise hand feature, please reach out and we'll try to guide you through that. You will also see that in the chat, it's been enabled for you to be able to copy items that are placed in the chat, any links, anything that you find useful. So if you have any technology issues through the way, feel free to place that into the chat and we'll do our best once again to answer your questions or to help you engage. With that, I will turn over to Yen, please, for all introductions, and just say thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm thrilled that we have made it this far. We've had two really fantastic sessions previous to this, and I'm really grateful to the Mayor and the Town Council, and also to the residents of Cheverly and my team, of course, in conducting these workshop sessions to educate community members on the threats of air pollution and also the solutions provided by low-cost monitoring and this campus community partnership that we've fostered between the University of Maryland School of Public Health and the Town Council of Cheverly. And so today's session will focus primarily, we've talked about kind of the threat or the problem statement being air pollution, and what are we doing, what are we going to do about it? And one of the solutions that we've talked about is low-cost, hyper-local air quality monitoring in the neighborhood and residences and businesses to collect data where it's not currently available and at scales that it's not currently available with regards to air quality and air pollution. And so now today we're going to talk about exactly what do we do? How do we interpret? How do we analyze and understand these data once we've collected them? And then also once we have an understanding of the data, how can we use that data and apply it to solve some of the problems or potential problems around air pollution and air pollution concerns. And so to do that, I will actually be joined today by the Director of Air and Radiation at the Maryland Department of Environment, Mr. Tad Aburn, is going to give a presentation of Maryland's air quality across the last few decades or the last couple of decades here in Maryland, and improvements and where we are and where we have to go. And then some of my team who you haven't really heard too much from yet, Ngazi, who is our resident high school intern from Eleanor Roosevelt High School, and Abraham, who is an undergraduate student who's been doing a lot of the data processing and work on that end of the project, are both going to be presenting some of their pieces as well. So to get us kicked off, I'm going to share my screen and we will get started. Okay, so is everyone seeing my PowerPoint slides?
Yes.
Excellent, cool. And I figured out, I figured out how to get subtitles working, and they're not 100%, but hopefully they'll be useful to some. Okay. So as I said, we're gonna go do a quick review, and then we're gonna hear from Tad. Abraham's gonna deliver a tutorial. I will deliver a case study on how these data, an example of how these data have been used in the past in a nearby community. And then we'll wrap up and do Q&A and get some feedback on the whole series of workshops. Okay, so Ngozi, you have the floor.
Morning, everybody. Like Ian said, my name is Ngozi. I'm an intern at the Siege Lab. So we just want to recap what we've been going on these last 2 weeks. So we have the Cheverly Air Monitoring Network. This network is a joint project between specifically a community-based participatory research project between the town of Cheverly and UMD. It builds community capacity, knowledge, and awareness. It puts data ownership into the hands of the community, and it informs policymakers of how air pollution is affecting the health of local residents. Some of the positive outcomes of community-based participatory research is when local community knowledge is useful, it's important, and it's valuable. You have shared power, control, and ownership of all your data and research for knowledge and analysis and solutions. People are agents rather than objects, and the researcher is not the director and expert, but the facilitator and catalyst. They're the ones who are making the change in the community. And so we have some of the principles of CBPR, which is outreach, consultation, involvement, shared leadership, and it's community driven. So what will some of the monitors do? So the purple air and air quality monitors are the ones that we're using in this project. They detect particulate matter, as well as nitrogen dioxide and ozone. And it's detecting these different air pollutions that come from multiple sources, from factories to wildfire, that all circles back into our air. And many of these emissions do affect human health in multiple ways. And so to the right, you see a map of, these are tentative locations of all the areas we want to put monitors at. So we have it listed through different homes, traffic sources, industry, and schools. So these are just a few of the examples of where we're going to be putting these monitors.
And I'll just cut in right here to give Karen some space to talk about where we are with that rollout and engaging community members for monitoring. Karen?
Yes, thank you, Jan and Ngozi. Yeah, if you take a look at this map, the black spots on there are kind of the sources of potential sources of air pollution. There's 4 gray dots in there, and those are areas where we have new development coming in. The purple dots, there's 5, actually 6 dots in there. Those are where we currently have operating our purple air sensors. 5 of them are part of the towns, and 1 is one of our citizens who put up his own site a couple of years ago. And if you go to purpleair.com and look at their map, you can see the active status of our current suite. Now, the blue dots are the areas where we want to include new purple air sensors. And most of those dots represent homes, and they are people who have already agreed to host a purple air sensor. And the last 2 weeks, Yan and I have been visiting various sites, people's homes. Takes about 20 minutes, and we take a look at their location, the strength of their Wi-Fi signal, where they have electricity to support these small devices on the outside of their home. The orange dots that you see there are schools. We have one school location that has agreed already to house one of these units. That's at the Cheverly Church in the center of town. But I'm hoping to go to our public and parochial schools, and there's a couple of high schools that are outside of our boundaries, but especially if we have Cheverly students there, it would be great to have a unit at the high schools. There's a couple of golden colored sites, and those are businesses or nonprofits. And we have hoping to also have units at their locations. Some of these locations are well within the industrial area south of town. Many of the people who have volunteered have some exposure and experience with some of the air pollution problems that we've experienced. So we're well on our way to greatly increase our number of active units. Hopefully in the month of March, we'll be expanding. So thank you, Yan. I'll turn it back to you.
So these are just a few examples of pollutants that are being circled back into our air. We have our primary pollutants, carbon monoxide, sulfur dioxide, nitrogen dioxide, and then some of our secondary pollutants, dioxide, ammonium, ozone, particulate matters. So these are just pollutants that are being circled throughout our air by shipping, towns and homes, and vehicle exhaust is a very big example, and factories. And this is how particulate matter enters into they go through our mouth. Usually the larger particles hit the back of our windpipe or throat and are captured in our mucus. Smaller particles travel through our body, through the air and static, and then they come into our lungs. And they can also enter through our bloodstream. And all of this causes health consequences. These are just a few examples of symptoms from long and short-term exposures to air pollutants, from having low birth weight to lung cancer in different aged people. So from pregnancy, children, adults, and elderly. Yeah, so these are just things we want to recap from our previous 2 sessions, then how air pollution and what our project will do. Thank you.
Thank you, Ngozi. Now we're going to transition to a presentation from Tad, the Air Director at MDE. So Tad, you have the floor, and I will control the slides. Tad, are you still there? Oh, you're muted.
I'm unmuted now. So can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, great. So first and foremost, I'd like to thank the community organizers and Yan and the University of Maryland folks for inviting us to be part of this process. We're really excited about it, and hopefully we can be very helpful. So I'm just going to talk a little bit today, just real quickly, about the status of where we are in Maryland with air quality, and I'll mention climate change a little bit because that's such a hot topic right now. So if you could move to the second slide. I'm going to cover just a couple pieces. Where we are, progress we've made, talk about community partnerships, and particularly this hyperlocal air monitoring concept and how excited we are about it and how we're anxious to participate. and then talk a little bit about opportunities for how we can help, what we can do. And then just if there's a few minutes for questions, I'll take them. So next slide, Jan. So we do have a long history of having bad air quality in Maryland. And I've been doing this job for 30 plus years, so I've been through all of it. In the 2005 timeframe, we did have terrible air quality. Our air quality was ranked as amongst the worst in the entire country. 2005, a really famous MIT study looking primarily at fine particulate air pollution. They described Maryland's air as the riskiest air to breathe east of the Mississippi. In 2008, the Environmental Protection Agency designated Maryland, actually it was the Baltimore area, as the worst ozone area anywhere outside of California and Texas. The good news is that we've seen a lot of improvement. We still have more work to do, but in 2021, that is all very different. So next slide, Jan. This is just a snapshot of all the pollutants that we measure and regulate. And what it shows is that every pollutant that we used to have problems with, we're now meeting the federal air quality standard. And again, I know you have some background. I don't have a lot of time, but we do run a network of monitors and we measure air pollution across the state. Yes, we do need to look at hotspots. Yes, this sensor project is exciting because it starts to allow us to do that. But for every single pollutant, starting in the 2000 timeframe through now, we've seen dramatic downward trends so that now we are not only meeting many of the standards, we're far below the standards for some critical pollutants like fine particulates. So next slide, Jan. Ozone is our continuing most difficult problem. Part of the reason it's our most difficult problem is our research program. We do research with University of Maryland, some folks that Sokobi works with, Russ Dickerson. Probably 70% of our ozone problem originates in a state upwind of Maryland. It's a secondary pollutant. I just saw that piece added. It forms photochemically, and it can travel for hours and hours and days. So it's been a real struggle, but you can see a real trend to the point where in 2020, we had only 3 days in the state where we had levels above the ozone standard. And for those 3 days, it wasn't all the monitors, it was just 1 or 2 monitors. So we're making real progress on ozone, but we still have a ways to go. Next slide, please. This is just a snapshot of sort of spatially how ozone has changed. So it's not just that the levels are lower, it's the fact that the spatial risk has been reduced significantly. The color-coded plot on the left, reds are bad, purples are terrible, greens are good, yellows are less good, but still better. So you can see tremendous spatial progress on ozone as well. But again, we still have more to do, and we've got plans. We'll talk about that a little bit, but it's our biggest problem. Next slide, please. This is a trend line I'm quite proud of. This is fine particle air pollution. Fine particle air pollution is perhaps the riskiest air pollutant we regulate. It's directly linked to mortality. It has significant respiratory effects. And what you can see is a tremendous downward trend. And this is actually the worst monitor in the state. So, or the common, every year, the worst monitor in the state. So all the other monitors are actually better than this data shows, but it's a great downward trend. And not only did we start to meet the standard in the 2010 to 2012 timeframe, but we've continued to go down, and we expect to continue to go down, get lower and lower fine particle levels as time moves on, as we transition away from coal and natural gas, and we start to get more and more zero emission vehicles into the fleet. So this is a really good news story for probably our highest risk air pollutant. So next slide, please. This is SO2. It's a relatively recent pollutant with a new standard. So about 3 or 4 years ago, we had 3 difficult areas in the state, one around the Baltimore area, one around the Montgomery County area, and one up in the far western part of the state. The good news is that we know we've things have changed. We've had a lot of coal-fired power plant retirements. The Luke paper mill in Western Maryland is no longer operating. So the SO2 levels are much lower. And so this is another good news story where we're meeting the standards. All we really need to do now is finish up the paperwork to get it all done. So next slide, Jan. Air toxics is one that people don't talk about, but we've also seen really interesting trends for air toxics across the state. This just shows a couple pieces. And the bottom line is when people ask me for a sort of a thumbnail, what's happened, we've pretty much cut exposure to air toxics by half over the past 10, 20 years. So it's another interesting story. Again, more work to do, but we are clearly making progress. So next slide.
And just to loop this back to a previous concept that we discussed in the last session. So these air toxics are what we refer to as VOC, volatile organic compounds, in the previous session, for anyone who wanted to connect that dot.
So what's driven the progress? I mean, I could go on and on about this, but some of the big high profile programs include things like for the smokestack stationary sources, the Maryland Healthy Air Act in 2006, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, a power plant regulation in 25, and there's a whole bunch more, but those are some of the big hitters. For mobile sources, we've also seen progress. The 2007 Clean Cars program, that's basically California standards in Maryland. And then the federal rules have been helpful with the tailpipe standards. I won't go into the details, but both the tier 2 and tier 3 federal standards have helped a lot. And we do have a really interesting one coming up. We got a lot of work, but one of the ones that's interesting is our zero emission medium and heavy duty truck process. We're working on that. That's probably one of our newest initiatives. It's going to be real exciting, and it's we're making progress on small vehicles, light duty vehicles, but now we're pushing medium and heavy duty trucks. So next slide, Jan. Again, some of the current policies that are in the works right now, I won't go through this in detail, but climate change, we have our Greenhouse Gas Reduction Act, we have a whole bunch of legislation, our Climate Commission, and we've been working hard on something called short-lived climate pollutants. Those are pollutants like methane and hydrofluoric. They're super potent greenhouse gases. Ozone, we are working on this transport piece, which is pollution coming in from other states, and we have a 184C petition that's actually being decided upon by EPA right now. We're pushing very hard to get into attainment everywhere in the state by 2021. We have regulations for municipal waste combustors and aftermarket catalysts that we're working on. Mobile sources, we have the medium and heavy duty ZEV MOU. We have the Volkswagen settlement, which we're implementing. We have the Transportation Climate Initiative, and a huge effort trying to transition our vehicle fleet to electric vehicles. We have several wonderful partnerships. Two of the highest profile are the Port Partnership and our Peak Day Partnership. The Peak Day Partnership is an effort to get large stationary sources to make extra effort on the days we forecast are going to be bad. And yes, environmental justice, this issue of hyperlocal air monitoring is a huge priority. There is a reinvigorated process across MDE. I'm just the air guy, but across MDE, there's a new reinvigorated process on environmental justice. And yes, we do look very closely at environmental justice in our permits and compliance process. Yeah, next slide. I'm going to go through these real quick, but we have just released our 2030 greenhouse gas plan required by our 2009 and 2016 laws. It requires, the earlier law required a 25% reduction in greenhouse gases by 2020. We met that. The new law, the second law requires a 40% reduction by 2030. We are on track to meeting that. There's a new bill that's probably going to set the the bar even higher, maybe raise it as far as 60% by 2030. We're already working on that. Next, that link at the bottom was just how you can get to the current plan if you're interested. It just was released last week. It's a huge effort. So next slide. This just shows where we're going with the plan. The green bar is the plan. The purple bar is the old plan, and the gray bar is what happens if we do nothing. As you can see, we're on a path to get to about 50% reduction by 2030, and very deep reductions by 2050. But the red dots show sort of where in the long run we want to go, and the real interesting one is carbon neutrality by about 2045. So we're making progress, but we still got a ways to go. Next slide. And again, I won't go through this, but just for those folks, the law also requires that we implement this program in a way that has a positive impact on the economy and a positive impact on jobs. And this is just the most recent information on job impacts, impact on GDP. I won't go through it in detail, a lot of numbers, but it's all positive. So as we're implementing this plan, we're not only helping to reduce greenhouse gases, we're creating jobs, and we're helping the economy. So next slide. This effort is one we're extremely interested in, a whole bunch of reasons. One is we recognize that our monitoring network is limited. It's actually a very dense network given what other states have, but in general, we have one monitor per county. And that does not give you the kind of coverage that you need to look at things like hotspots. And so we're very interested in this project. And we're not only interested in it because it's a new project, we're interested in it partially because we want to see how sensors might enhance our network, our monitoring network into the future. We also feel like this is a great way to build partnerships, and that's one of the reasons I'm here, is to offer our services as part of this partnership. Next slide, please. How will we use it? Again, we're very interested in just how the technology works and how it might help us in the future. That's one reason we're very interested in it. But we will also, when the data starts to be collected, I will use the data to target my inspection and enforcement staff to go out and look at things if we see anomalies that we don't think we should be seeing. So we will use this in a policy context straight away. Over time, what I would love to do is I'd love to add sensor data to our already existing real-time data tools. So if you want to, you can go onto our website and you can find out what the air quality is at the monitor closest to your home, and you can use that. Nursing homes use it because of their clientele. Parents with children who are asthmatic use it, but it is limited because it's one monitor per county. Over time, it would be wonderful to have this kind of a dense network to help communicate to folks. You could actually start to get at this issue of what is the air quality in my neighborhood. We get at what is the air quality in your county, but we don't get at that. So we're very anxious to help with that. And again, the one I'll talk about this for a minute, but one of the things we've had a huge amount of success with is reducing diesel emissions. And almost all of these projects identify diesel particulate or diesel exhaust as a key issue that we need to get at in terms of a policy to reduce risk. And we have considerable experience with that. I'll go through that a minute. I know I'm running out of time. So next slide, Jan. We have a lot of experience in this. We've been doing this for the past 5 years. It's a new area. And a lot of our work has been focused on overburdened communities where there's already a lot of air pollution and a lot of sources. Over the past 10 years, we've invested $16 million, and we have plans to basically increase that by an order of magnitude into the next 10 years. Again, the funding comes primarily from federal grants, a big program called the Diesel Emission Retrofit Act. We have had tremendous success in Maryland at getting those monies. We've also used state funds, and there's also been over the past few years a large pot of money specifically designated to clean up NOx and diesel pollution that came from what I call the Volkswagen settlement. It's when Volkswagen broke the law and they had to pay huge amounts of money to mitigate the environmental damage that they created. Maryland got 76 million. So it's really helped us increase our efforts in reducing diesel. Next slide, please. Just some projects from the past. We have a wonderful partnership with the port and the Port of Baltimore. I'll give more detail on that in a second, but we've replaced dray trucks, cargo handling equipment, all sorts of things that are emitting around the port, local fleets. So it's a direct benefit to the folks that live in the communities next to the port. Again, some of the reduction numbers are at the bottom. We've also dealt with locomotives, trucks, ships, all sorts of different sources. We've retrofit, cleaned up, reduced the diesel emissions. We also have school bus programs. So a lot going on. A lot has happened in the past with diesel. Next slide, please. The future, we've got a lot going on over the next 5 years. We have some community specific initiatives like an initiative in Turner Station with trash trucks, Curtis Bay in Baltimore, some yard trucks, huge projects driven by the Volkswagen money. A lot going on at the port, a lot going on at the private sector around the port, and also other private sector sources in and around the Baltimore and Washington areas. And again, there's a lot of work going on as well on electrification. Electrification is a huge priority in Maryland, and the Volkswagen money had a chunk of that set aside to make sure that we're focusing on electrification. Next slide. I've mentioned the port partnership a couple of times. This is a really good example of one of the things we can do in working with communities. This is a partnership, big partnership. It's about 6 or 7 years old, that involves the Port of Baltimore, the Maryland Department of the Environment, the Maryland Department of Transportation, and the Maryland Energy Administration. And it also involves about 15 to 20 communities that actually are part of the process, part of the decision-making process about how to reduce emissions in and around the port. And yes, the focus of the work I've been doing has been diesel reduction, but the port partnership actually branches off into other media and other issues as well, things like dredging. But the diesel emission reduction piece has been a really high profile success story. And again, through 2020, a huge investment so far into reducing both nitrogen oxide, diesel particulate, and greenhouse gas emissions. I won't go through all the numbers, but it's been very, very successful. Again, we work with the communities. They help make decisions about what to fund, what reductions to get. And again, the collaboration with the communities continues on today. So that's a great example of something that has been a real success story. Next slide, Jan. I think it's the last one. Yep, I'm done. That's probably a little bit on time, but I'd be happy to take questions or if folks have thoughts, love to hear them. So, or Jan, you may not have time, but I'm here for questions if folks have them.
Sure, I think we can probably, if folks have direct questions for Tad, we can probably field 2 of those right now and then maybe more at the end. Are there any in the chat? Who are my chat monitors? Sheila, I see you're raising your hand, so I will give you the floor.
I gotta unmute.
Yep, we can hear you.
Yeah, good. No, I was just repeating the question that I put in the chat. Can you repeat that URL for the greenhouse gas emissions plan?
You know what I'll do? I'll provide
Put it in
this.
the chat.
I will put it in the chat, but I'll also provide this whole PowerPoint that can be shared with everybody.
Okay,
Excellent, thank you,
good
Tad.
to hear.
Okay, and so Karen has asked, are there other areas in Maryland tackling local air quality monitoring, either at this hyper-local scale or maybe a little bit broader? Tad, are you collaborating with any other partners with regards to these local networks?
Yes, we are. There are currently 4 in some form of being implemented efforts in Maryland. There's this one. There's also a fairly advanced one going on in the Baltimore area. It's also a partnership with researchers. Johns Hopkins and Yale are doing that project. It's called the Search Project. Again, there's about 50 stationary sensors that have been put up around the Baltimore area, and they're trying to figure out right now, they plan to use some mobile sensors where they're going to use sensors that people have in backpacks, and so you figure out over the course of your day where you're getting your highest exposure. So the Baltimore one is fairly sophisticated and well funded with federal money. So there's also one in St. Mary's County, a little different. There, it's a little bit a different type set of equipment, some sensors, but also some other types of monitors. But we're also working with the St. Mary's County people, and I'm working with a group of folks, including Socobe, on maybe another hyperlocal network project that would focus on the DC area and some of the Maryland counties that butt up next to the DC area. But it's clearly a hot area. I expect to see a lot more of this. And, you know, we are looking at it from a state perspective in terms of how over time can we perhaps use this technology to enhance our existing network, which is very good, but it's limited in terms of its spatial coverage. And so if we can use the sensors, they might not be as good as our federal reference method monitoring sites, but the sensors clearly provide good data that allows you to sort of figure out what's going on across an area. So we do have other projects, and like I said, it's an exciting area, and it's the wave of the future.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Tad. I see there are a couple more questions. We'll save them for the end, and I think, Tad, you can also leave your contact information to how to get in touch with you and folks at your office. We're also joined by David, who's also with MDE. Thanks for joining, David. But we'll move along from here.
Yeah, the other thing I meant to have it in the slide presentation. I didn't, but if folks ever have an after hours or even during the day complaint, a source is smelling bad, or we have a 24-hour, I'll send you the 24-hour number that folks can call when that happens. I do have about 35, 40 inspectors, but given that we have 10,000 sources, we are limited to get everywhere every day on time, but we do have folks that go out and do follow up on complaints. So I'll send you that too.
Excellent. Thanks, Tad. Okay, so now we will be moving on to Abraham, who's going to tell us, once we collect the data, what do we do next? So Abraham, you have the floor.
Awesome. So yeah, the first thing I'm going to talk about is actually getting the data. So all the Purple Air data is on the Purple Air website, actually. And the Purple Air website is free. It's open source for anyone. And it contains real-time data, so current data, also historical data, so data from history, or as long as the air monitors have been up. So the website relies on the Purple Air monitors and the people who host those monitors. And all the monitors that are working should be on the website. So I actually made a video about how to download data from the website, and that's on the next slide. So Yan, if you want to play that video, go ahead.
Are you all hearing the audio?
No.
Okay, 1 second. I think I have to reshare. And share with the sound. There we are. Okay.
In order to download the Purple Air data, you will need to navigate to the Purple Air website. You want to locate the search bar in the top left corner, enter in and click on your target location, click on the air monitor that you want data for, hover over the Get This widget, and click Download. We start by navigating to the map page on Purple Air's website. Again, you will want to navigate to the search bar in the top left corner. You will want to search your target location. In this instance, I am searching for Cheverly, Maryland. Select the location that appears appropriate. Once selected, you will see all of the air monitors in that location. In this case, there are 6 air monitors represented by green circles on the map. Click on the monitor that you want data for, hover over the Get This widget text, and click on the Download button. This should direct you to a web page that will download the data. Once on the web page, you can select the start date, end date, and average minutes that you want data for. Go ahead and select the Download Primary A button. Note that downloading Primary B will give you very similar data, and you can also select this button. Either option works, as the air monitors have 2 sensors on them. Because these sensors are located right next to each other, the data they are recording should be very similar. Go ahead and open up the file. We're going to take a look at the data. The file should contain 10 columns. The columns that you are really interested in are the created at, the PM1, the PM2.5, the PM10, and the temperature and the humidity. So that's how you download the data if you're interested in analyzing it yourself. And then I also, if you want to go to the next slide when you get back there, I talk about how to actually analyze the data and look at the data for yourself. So there's a few ways that you can analyze the data.
Oh,
or a
sorry.
few softwares you can use. And then I'm going to talk about the Google Sheets software and the Tableau software. Those are 2 of my favorites, but there's also many other softwares available. So yeah,
Sorry,
when you get the slide up, I'll start
Yeah.
introducing them.
Yeah, sorry for the issues I'm having here. It usually cooperates a little bit better than this. Let's see if I can pull it up.
I guess while we're waiting, does anyone have any questions regarding downloading data from the Purple Air website?
Okay, sorry about that. Should be coming up now.
In this video, I will be showing you how to analyze Purple Air data in Google Sheets. First, you will want to drag your Purple Air file into a Google Drive folder. Then you want to click on the file, click on Open With, and click on Google Sheets. The main columns you will most likely be interested in are the created at column, the PM1, the PM2.5, the PM10, the temperature, and the humidity columns. Let's go ahead and find and replace all of the UTC in the created at column. This will allow us to use the points in the created at column as date and time values. On Mac computers, we can do this by pressing Command F. Now that UTC is removed, let's go ahead and split the date and time into two separate columns. We can do this by selecting a new column, entering an equals, split, parentheses, A2, comma, quotation marks, and then end the parentheses. Go ahead and rename the columns date and time. Copy and paste the cells all the way down to the bottom of the column, and the correct values will automatically be placed inside. Let's graph date versus PM 2.5. You can do this by selecting the date column and then the PM 2.5 column, pressing insert in chart. From here, we're going to want to edit the chart. So let's go ahead and press the 3 circles and then move to its own sheet. Let's then press edit chart. Let's put the date on the x-axis. You can do this by going to the x-axis option and selecting date. We're now going to want to remove date from series. We now have all the dates plotted, but let's average the values per day instead of plotting multiple times per day. Why don't we change our graph to a line chart instead of a bar graph? You can do this by selecting the line graph option. We currently have the sum or the total PM 2.5 for each day. Let's change that to the average or the median. You can do this by selecting the sum option and selecting the average or median or max or min, whichever one you desire. Let's go ahead and press the customize option. This is to the right of the setup option. This option allows us to customize our graph. Let's give our graph the title PM 2.5 by date. Let's label each day with its corresponding PM 2.5 levels. We can do this by selecting the series and then data labels. Let's make this more readable. How about we only show the first 2 decimal values? There are many other ways you can customize your chart. I recommend playing around with it further in order to get the chart that you desire. Let's return to the main page so we can create a new chart. Why don't we chart the columns PM 2.5 and time? We now have a chart of PM 2.5 versus time. Let's see if we can change it around to try to gather some insights from it. Similar to the last graph we made, I'm going to set the x-axis and then aggregate the data in order to group by the specific values on the x-axis.
Why don't we keep it a bar graph this time? Let's change the graph to show the average for each hour rather than the sum. Let's title our graph PM 2.5 by time of day. Let's also label our data to the second decimal point like we did on the last graph. We now have a graph that shows the average PM 2.5 levels for each hour of the day.
So again, that was a video on how to use Google Sheets. Just a little background on Google Sheets. It's free. It's open source for anyone to use. You don't need to download any software. You just need access to the internet. And if anyone has ever used Microsoft Excel before, it's actually very similar to Microsoft Excel. And there's lots of tutorials online about how to use it if you have any questions. And then my other software that I mainly use is Tableau. Tableau is really nice, and there's a lot of free versions for students and free trials in general, but this version does cost money. It's very intuitive and easy to use. It's mostly clicking and dragging. And then I made a video about how to download the software and also about how to use it to analyze data.
I think what we'll do is we'll gloss over how to download it because that might be pretty intuitive, and just kind of get into the video on, just to kind of get some time back, just on how the platform works. Is that okay, Abraham?
Yeah, that's fine. I think we're gonna post all these videos anyways for people, so that works well.
Sure. Cool. And so are you all seeing, are you seeing the video load up there?
No.
Second. Thank you for feedback. Okay, it should be good now.
And open up Tableau. Once you have Tableau open, go ahead and select the More option. From here, you can select the file that you wish to analyze. Go ahead and click on the file and press Open. The data should pop up. If this isn't your data set, you might want to look and make sure you have the right file. Press the orange Sheet 1 button in the lower left-hand corner to go to the worksheet. On the left-hand side of the worksheet, we have our columns from our data set. Go ahead and change the created at data to a date and time data type. Go ahead and drag the created at variable into the columns option. Let's analyze some air quality data. Go ahead and select PM 2.5. Make sure you're selecting the CF1 and not the ATM. Drag this over to the rows option. Let's change the PM 2.5 variable to a dimension data type by clicking on the arrow and selecting dimension. Each of those blue bars represents a measurement taken at an instance in time. Let's go ahead and expand the created at variable to see individual measurements at the quarter, month, and day values. Let's say we want to remove the month of May from our data set. We can do this by dragging the created at variable into the filters option and selecting month and then May. Why don't we label points where PM 2.5 levels are very high with color? Drag the PM 2.5 variable into color. Change the data type to dimension. Click on color and then edit colors to select your desired color pattern. Let's reverse the colors so red is high and green is low. Let's also make it so any point above 80 is red, and any point below 80 is green. You can see instances where the PM 2.5 level is above 80 is now red. Why don't we compare this with PM1? Simply click and drag PM1 over next to PM 2.5. Make sure to change the data type to dimension. Instead of looking at dimension, which is the individual data points, why don't we look at the average level of PM 2.5 for each day? We can do this by selecting Measure and Average. Why don't we remove the color code to get a clearer picture? How about we visualize each day of the month, rather than the year, quarter, month, and day? Our graph is currently a line graph. Let's make it a bar graph. Why don't we visualize day of the week instead of day of the month? How about we visualize day of the week for every month?
So that's how to use Tableau. And again, this is just for you guys to be able to go in and see your data for yourself in case you're curious and want to monitor it. There are other softwares out there which I can add on to the PowerPoints later if these don't look useful for you, but these are two of my favorites. Thank you.
Thanks, Abraham. And generally, the idea is that we will be, as the project rolls out and as we do start collecting more data, we will be doing more of these specific workshops on how, like a data school kind of thing around specifically using the Cheverly data, and you know, going back to our CBPR principles, using that as a means of building community capacity, and you know, as an added benefit of not just being able to collect data and use it for different research practices or use it for different kind of community organizing practices, but actually use it, you know, with school programs or with any citizens, any residents in town that want to become more familiar with using data. That's one of the things that we've built kind of into our program here. And so speaking of using the data, I'm going to provide a brief case study of how we used low-cost air quality monitoring around, you know, in tandem with community organizing to seek not a political, but a policy endpoint that is favorable for the community. So I'll be speaking about Bladensburg, and I specifically chose Bladensburg for this example because and actually, sorry, I think I may have shared the wrong set of slides here. So here we are. Okay, so the reason I chose Bladensburg is because it is actually very close to Cheverly, and I imagine many people in the audience have either driven through Bladensburg or visited the waterfront park and might be familiar with Bladensburg. Bladensburg is part of what's called the port towns, and this is not an official, you know, kind of municipal or political designation. It's just kind of an association of these four towns: Cottage City, Colmar Manor, Edmonston, and Bladensburg. And they're called the port towns because of their proximity to the Anacostia River, which kind of winds through here. And notable landmarks of the port towns include the Peace Cross, a World War II monument, Bladensburg Elementary School, the King Missionary Baptist Church, the historical Black church, and the Bladensburg Waterfront Park. And then as far as air pollution goes with regards to the port towns, this is kind of a busy map, so I'm going to walk it through step by step by pointing out this legend over here. So right now what we're seeing in terms of the colors across the page are the percentile ranks for PM 2.5. In our previous sessions, we've discussed particulate matter at length. And so this is compared to the rest of the state of Maryland, the particulate matter levels in the port towns area. And as Tad had mentioned, this is using the tool EPA EJ Screen, and it's using the existing kind of regulatory network of monitors that MDE manages and oversees. So as you can see in the port towns area, you have census tracts, which are in both the 95 to 100 percentile ranks and the 90 to 95th percentile rank. So these are very, very high compared to the rest of the state. So that's these demarcations, these colored blocks here. And then when you go to this next layer, sites reporting to EPA, specifically, I've highlighted the air pollution sites reporting to EPA. So these are all of the permitted emitters that are required to report their emissions to EPA. So you can think of these as facilities that are permitted emitters in this community. And then finally, you'll see this ring, this kind of yellowish green ring around this area. And what that is a 1 mile buffer zone. So the radius of this circle from center to edge is 1 mile. And the center is actually the Ernest Meyer concrete block company, concrete block plant in the center of Bladensburg here. And we'll get back to why that's important in a second. But going a little bit further on this EJ Screen data, this is the environmental kind of, a lot of it having to do with air pollution and some having to do with wastewater. But these are the levels compared to state percentile is this column. Regional percentile, the EPA has different regions that it breaks the country up into, is this green level. And then the national percentile compared to the rest of the state. And so you can see we're above in this port towns area, it's above the 75th percentile for all of these indicators: particulate matter, ozone, diesel particulates, cancer risk, respiratory hazards, traffic proximity, lead paint indicators, Superfund proximity, risk management plan sites, hazardous waste sites, and wastewater dischargers. And so that's the environmental context. And then the justice context of it all is this demographic, these demographic indicators. So you see here, the community is over 90% people of color, almost a third low income population, low wealth. A relevant percentage is linguistically isolated. And that means basically the adults in the home, and this is all based on census data. So adults on the the most recent census that this data is pulled from, answered on the questionnaire that they are not comfortable or not fluent in English. And so, you know, a fairly high population of residents without a high school education, and then 7% under the age, 7% under the age, very small children, and 10% over the age of 64, older adults. And so when we're talking about the Ernest Meyer concrete block plant, this is a community, I mean, it can be called an institution really in the most base level, in that it's been in the community since 1926. It's been operating as a block plant since the 1950s. Oops. And to many of the community members, it is an eyesore. And there are lots of concerns regarding what these facilities' impact on air pollution is locally to the residents of the port towns and Bladensburg specifically. And some of those concerns linger around the dust. This is actually a jar, 3 pounds of dust that was swept off of the King Missionary Baptist Church steps. The pastor has provided testimony that every Sunday before service, he has to sweep the dust from the steps, so that parishioners can enter without, you know, getting their clothes all dirty. And where is that dust coming from? So we have a lot of stockpiles. For those of you who might not be familiar with how concrete blocks are made, and so we're talking about things like cinder blocks and concrete stone. And so how that is made is you have these aggregate, which is essentially cooked down into a mixture and then processed into these molds to form those concrete blocks. So there are concerns about the dust itself blowing off site and then also getting picked up by vehicles going in and out of the site, not to mention that these vehicles are most often diesel trucks. And so there's the diesel emissions related to that, and then it being tracked all over town and intruding into houses by, through wind exposure and stuff like that. This is actually a picture from the King Missionary Baptist Church, which is only about 35 feet
Excuse me,
from,
Ann,
oh, yes?
you may not have seen in, we're still on, at least I'm still seeing the EJ screen. I'm not seeing the photos that you're referencing.
Oh no, okay.
My apologies for interrupting.
No problem. Let me see if I can rectify this. I am so sorry. Abraham, it's your videos. It threw me off. So share. Okay, what are you seeing now? Are you seeing a slide?
Now we're seeing the Port Towns Environmental Action slide.
Okay, and the last thing you saw was this slide?
No, I think that we were stuck,
Oh, geez. Okay.
stuck much
So-
further back.
Sure. Okay, and are you seeing this Bladensburg, Maryland case study
Yes.
slide? Okay, I'll just go through so you can see so I can describe some of the pictures. So this is the area, Port Towns area, Cottage City, Colmar Manor, Edmonston, Bladensburg, Peace Cross, Bladensburg Elementary School. This is the King Missionary Baptist Church that I was talking about. These are the steps that the pastor had to sweep free of the dust every Sunday. And this is a picture of the Bladensburg Waterfront Park. And so this is that graphic that I was talking about that everyone was probably scratching their heads. So the census block group, so here you can see the percentile ranks. So the darker color means higher exposure to particulate matter 2.5. So that's, you can see here in these areas, but these in towards the center of Bladensburg is also in the 90th to 95th percentile. So still very high. These square markers are the permitted emitters throughout a 1 mile area. And of course, the center of this circle here is the Ernest Meyer block plant. More data that everyone was probably scratching their heads about. So just to show, this is the 75th percentile rank. So from state to region to country, Bladensburg and the port towns are above the 75th percentile for all of these indicators: particulate matter, lead, hazardous waste, wastewater discharge. And then to reiterate, this is a highly, very large population being people of color, a third being low wealth residents, linguistically isolated, not having a college education, 28% not having a high school education, 7% very small children, 10% older adults. And here are some images that I was describing. So this is the concrete block plant itself. That's the jar of 3 pounds of dust from the church steps, the aggregate stockpiles, the diesel trucks, the types of diesel trucks that go in and out of the plant. And then this is the view from the church, the King Missionary Baptist Church, which is only 35 feet away from the block plant. And I should also add that this facility being as old as it has, in a lot of ways, it's been grandfathered in to the point where it doesn't have to do or hadn't had to do the same levels of reporting and studies and kind of assessments, environmental assessments and health assessments that other newer facilities have had to comply with. And so the Port Towns Environmental Action, a small coalition of community members, got together to fight an application for a special exception. Now, the concrete block plant wanted to expand its operation using its same footprint where it is today, but to also include concrete batching, which is another another process for concrete. And the concern here is that being that this facility was so old and it had that kind of context of being grandfathered in, and under this special exception like legal or policy process, it was not required to conduct a health impact assessment or an environmental impact assessment in order to submit this application for expanding its permit to include concrete batching. So the Port Towns Environmental Action Coalition got together. They rallied local advocacy groups, including Progressive Cheverly, and they began what became a 2-year grassroots social media organizing and canvassing campaign. Here I have the photos of Nancy Meyer, who is the Director of Community Forklift, Chris Melendez and Paul Howe, who are both directors of the Port Towns Community Development Corps, the CDC. And so these individuals rallied their community members to give testimony about the existing impacts of the block plant. And they also recruited us at the University of Maryland to do some community science training and monitoring for air pollution. So what we did was we trained some local high school students to conduct traffic counts and mobile and stationary monitoring. So the traffic counts you can see here, really it's exactly what it sounds. It doesn't necessarily look very scientific, but it is very scientific, where you set a protocol for how often and what intervals you're going to count traffic at what times a day and record that and measure that. And then for the mobile monitoring, we actually had, this is one of our graduate students, Rosemary, who walked around with, this is an older version of the AirBeam, which monitors particulate matter and noise levels. And she walked on a set route, on a set interval of time and days in front of the Ernest Meyer block plant, in front of the church, around the block plant to get some level of what we discussed in previous sessions as fence line monitoring, and in and out to the confluence area where the Peace Cross is. And so here are some of the results that were collected, and this is the area. So this is where that Peace Cross is. We call it the confluence area because it's where, it's where Baltimore Avenue meets Bladensburg Road, meets Annapolis Road. And this is where the concrete block plant is, Ernest Meyer. This pin right here, the label's not showing up, but this pin is where the King Missionary Baptist Church is. We had another monitoring site at the intersection of Edmonston Road here, and then the Hillcrest Terrace Apartments and Bladensburg Elementary. So you can see these are all very close to, to the Ernest Meyer facility. And the research, what the data showed was that the church during the morning peak time, so we're talking, these are about with regards to traffic, so the morning kind of rush time, the church had some of the highest values for traffic counts during that time. And then it kind of petered off over time, but the morning typically was the highest, the most busy time for truck traffic in the area. And then comparing that to the afternoon off peak, which was the non-rush hour time, and then the evening rush hour time as well is shown there. And then in terms of traffic counts relevant to air pollution, relevant to noise, we also saw that, so at the confluence area here where the Peace Cross is, that was where you had the highest level of traffic, which you can understand because it's the intersection of those three major roads. But actually following close behind that was the Hillcrest Apartments, as with Annapolis Road being kind of a major thoroughfare on its way to this area. And then we saw those traffic trends in Bladensburg, and we also, based on the mobile and stationary monitoring, saw particulate matter trends, and particulate matter stayed relatively similar throughout the town, but we definitely saw that it was highest nearest Ernest Meyer. And this is not necessarily a smoking gun, but this is all evidence, to show impact and exposure. So we saw that the highest levels were at the nearest the Ernest Meyer plant. And so ultimately all of this culminated, and not without the help of tireless efforts on behalf of the rest of the coalition, to provide impacts, stormwater impacts, to provide testimony on quality of life and hazardous impacts. With regards also, when we're talking about traffic, it's not necessarily just the traffic as a driver of air pollution, but it's also traffic is dangerous for crossing the street and for being a pedestrian. And so all of this kind of brought together a significant amount of evidence to the Prince George's District Council, which ultimately denied the application for this expansion to a concrete batching plant here in the Port Towns area. So this is all of an example. This is all kind of goes to show that air pollution, especially the way that we're collecting it in this low cost, hyper local way, is not the end all be all. And I think we've reiterated this in each session. But what it does is it gives more data and it fills a gap. Particularly important, as Tad was saying, we have these hotspots where data is not being collected and the context is not really known with regards to air pollution. So what these programs allow us to do is collect monitoring data where it's not currently being monitored, to add to the weight of the evidence that we do know with regards to things like traffic counts, with regards to things like the kind of higher scale air quality monitoring that MDE does and the like. So summing it all up, kind of bringing it all together across the last 3 sessions, we've talked about CBPR, community-based participatory research, and community science and citizen science training as ways to partner with institutions like MDE, like the School of Public Health, to build local capacity, learning things like coding and data analysis, all in order to seek justice and environmental justice specifically. Air pollution exposure coming from a range of different stationary and mobile sources, both near and far, is harmful to human and environmental health. This is something that we know now and we've known for decades. And moving on to that, Maryland overall air quality has improved significantly in the last decades, but the hotspots do still exist. And so these hyper-local, low-cost air quality networks provide a community-level data set for residents to use and understand once they are trained to analyze and understand these data and informed on how to use these findings for community action. So that kind of ties up everything that we've discussed over the last 3 sessions. And I would be happy. I know I've seen kind of the chat box flashing, so I definitely want to devote whatever time we have left to questions and feedback.
And we have a
Yes.
small number of attendees, small enough that I'd like to see if you're open to elevating everyone to panelists so that we can have more of a collaborative conversation.
Absolutely.
Would that work for you?
Absolutely.
Okay,
Please
I'll
do.
go ahead and do that. So just letting everybody know you're being brought on as panelist. You will be able to control your own camera and your own muting and unmuting, but encourage you, if you are willing, welcome to be on video and just to talk with each other. Well, it's just taking a few minutes because the screen likes to jump around every time I go to promote someone.
So Ian, this is Karen. I just wanted to thank you and all our speakers today. I thought a good conversation might be in discussing the kinds of reports that we might look forward to getting, things that might be kind of a regular kind of information collection that we want to look forward to. Do you have ideas from other areas that have been doing their own local data collecting that might give us some guidance?
Sure. So one thing that we've talked about and planned was creating kind of a dashboard separate from the Purple Air Network that is specifically kind of tailored to the interests of Cheverly residents and kind of really brings it into focus. So there's not so much noise from the rest of the monitors on Purple Air, but really kind of provides reasonable aggregations of the data. So for instance, a weekly kind of report of air quality in Cheverly, or a daily report of air quality in Cheverly. And especially we see this as something that can improve communities' ability to make decisions about where they're going and at what time of day. Abraham showed that we can parse out the data based on time of day. So you can show that, okay, maybe if I need to go to the southwest corner of town, I don't want to necessarily do that around morning, morning drive time, or maybe I'll save those trips for the afternoon or something because air pollution will be lower, or the trends show that air pollution will be lower at that time. So I think it would be very important for us to train more and more residents to not just understand kind of how the dashboard works, but be able to share that dashboard and kind of develop. I would like to see the community develop a newsletter, an air quality newsletter, or incorporate it into the kind of the town's message newsletter and kind of going out there as well.
Yeah, thank you. And I also thought, since we have Tad Burns is still here, and David from MDE, I wondered if you could provide some more insights about the Environmental Protection Agency's view of purple air, because I've been tracking some information in that area, and I know that they are paying attention to, especially to the purple air systems, because there's quite a bit of use throughout the country. So do you have any insights for us?
This is Tad, and I'll hand it off to Dave because Dave runs my air monitoring program, so he's the real expert. But yes, EPA is very interested in figuring out how to blend the purple air data sets in with the work that they already do, where they communicate the federal reference monitor data. So I know they're doing that already in California a little bit. In my presentation, I mentioned that's something we're very interested in. I think we need to be convinced that it's working. But yeah, EPA has been very interested. Dave, do you want to add into that? Because I know you've been following that in a lot of detail.
Sure. Yeah, EPA is already incorporating the purple air monitoring system around the country into their current Air Now website, which is the real-time display of air quality around the country. And this was initially done as a way to help provide information related to exposure around wildfires. That's what Tad mentioned, that it started in California. But it's actually now online, and you can see purple air monitors along with the regulatory network on EPA's official Air Now website. Now, I do want to say that the purple air sensors, and the manufacturer acknowledges this, as they come out of the factory, they tend to read high compared to our reference monitors. Excuse me. EPA has developed a national correction factor that they apply to the monitors, the purple air monitors, to make them read more like the reference monitors. And with that correction factor, they actually work very well. And Jan is actually working with MDE to co-locate the purple air sensors that he's bringing into Cheverly so that they can be directly compared to the MDE monitors as well.
Thanks, Dave.
I had noted that Karen had a question earlier. Let me see. I know I had marked it for me.
Yeah, I did.
Remember?
I did bring that question up.
Okay, so it's been covered. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts, and not just necessarily on this session, if you have any questions going back to the previous two sessions as well.
So this is Tad. I have a question for the community folks, and it links to, I've spent years doing this work. And so when I see things that we're doing that directly reduce risk, that's what I do my job for. So we are going to be, we're wrapping up our Volkswagen settlement process round 1 within the next few months. So within the next 6 months, we will probably figure out how much money we have left, and we will probably reopen the process for other individuals, businesses, government agencies to seek funding to do something good. And so if there are thoughts from the Cheverly community about something that might be good to clean up, most of it's been focused on diesel trucks of a whole, I gave you the long laundry list. But anyway, that there could be some funding within the next 6 months from Volkswagen. The Diesel Emission Retrofit Act process is open right now, so it might be hard to get anything going for this year. But that's also an annual process where millions of dollars can be sent to projects, community-based projects. So I'm a big pusher of the clean up the diesel truck fleet thing we do. So if folks are interested, let me know and we can start to work with you all. I mean, we have worked with the Turner Station community in Baltimore, and they did identify a local trash truck fleet that the owner was willing to work with us, and so we're putting some clean diesel trash trucks in Turner Station, and likewise the Curtis Bay area in Baltimore. Again, we funded some clean diesel work there too. So, and then there's a huge amount going on at the port. But anyway, let me know because it's something I'm really interested in.
Karen, we have a question. This is Julia and Ray, and we're on Carlisle. Are we the closest monitor to the Mart's bus lot, or is there a monitor down on Tuxedo Road near them?
Right now, your location will be the closest.
Is there a possibility of asking the storage facility to possibly have a monitor there? Because that would catch both the bus lot, which is, I'm guessing, is a high diesel polluter, as well as that open air truck site beyond that.
That is possibility. It is one of the locations that we have considered, although more recently we've been focused more on residents. Right. But I think, yeah, I think I'd be willing to go back with that. Mayor Mike had recommended that location. And because there's a big bus depot there for Greyhound, right?
It's the tour bus industry. It's their main site, and often you'll drive by and there'll be 25 buses all with their engines running at night.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's what I was going to bring up as far as something that we could use in the area, and I don't know quite the proper way to articulate it, but we need a close look, given that our community is bisected, surrounded by highways, to understand what is the diesel load that we're experiencing in this area. We have our own thoughts on it, just as Ray and Julia brought forward about the bus depot site. We also have, our industrial areas where there's idling of vehicles, to try to find out if there are ways to improve that. We also are surrounded by just various uses in industry, reaching over outside of town with the Whole Foods distribution area and the buses that idle along Cabin Branch Road, and then many different activities happening on Marblewood. I would like just a way to look more closely at that, to understand how that, what those levels are, how that might be impacting our community. The other thing that is not within town that I'm sure you're very familiar with and may not fit under this, but just to have your brain in it, is looking at the cleanup of Joseph Smith and Sons, plus the surrounding, even when we're talking about WSSC, we're talking about other areas where it's affecting not only Lower Beaver Dam Creek, but also the air that we all breathe. And that when we talk about the Cheverly funk, the smell, you know, maybe it is not harmful, but I will tell you, it is noxious. It is making people ill, just the odor of it, without even understanding what all that signifies. So any pots of money to take a closer look at that. And then of course, the much larger idea of the cleanup that's well outside the funding that we're talking about. But we do know that there are new PCBs being introduced on the site of Joseph Smith and Sons from past MDE, you know, reports. And we also know that there could be nothing new that ever gets on that site, but every drop of rain that runs off that site carries, you know, the legacy pollutants that are all throughout that area. And in with this, I would say largely community supports the development and quality development of Hospital Hill. We also want to make sure that we're doing everything possible to mitigate any additional load of pollutants, air and water, both in the construction, the design, construction and operation of that redevelopment.
Yeah, and I know that you're directing this, you know, at our MDE partners here, but I did want to cut in, and I wanted to say that it, you know, I'm very, very grateful that Tad brought up the issue, not the issue, but the solution of the EV, you know, retrofits and the what. It's after 12 o'clock. I'm like off the clock now. My brain's off the clock. But it's, you know, because a lot of these industries will claim to bring jobs and bring jobs and bring jobs. But what about clean jobs, right? It's not just any old job will do. And it's important to make that, to vocalize that distinction, because there is both a need for jobs and there is a need for health, and one should not supersede the other. Well, the health should supersede all. And so I just wanted to really kind of underline and again extend my appreciation for Tad and for David being on the call today, to walk us through what they are doing, you know, to seek environmental justice in these ways.
And one of the things that is a good piece of news to share is the Prologis Amazon development. You know, you hope that these things are happening, but it's confirmed that they are setting all the conduits and everything in place for an electric fleet for their vans. So, and I understand that Amazon has also been very active at the state level in the transition to electric vehicles. So anything more that MDE has to share on that, it would be great to learn. But it was pleasant to see that commitment is not just in voice, but in the planning and the construction of the parking sites.
Hello.
So this is
Okay, go ahead.
This is Tad. I know we're running out of time, but if we ever wanted to do a follow-up where we go through some of these questions, we'd be happy to do that. It could be a question and answer session where it's basically, hey, are these Greyhound buses allowed to idle all night long? And if they're not, what can we do about it? Because they should not be doing that.
What I would
We ought
say,
to talk about
what I would say, Tad, is absolutely. And if you can find a time that works for your team, and to give us a couple of weeks so we can put out to community, so that you can receive community questions, as many in advance, so we can hand them off to you so that you're prepared for them. the answer is yes, absolutely.
So, hi,
Sounds like a plan.
this is Dan. Just on that issue, it sounds like it's one of enforcement, and then maybe the community could help by just documenting some of that, taking videos or audio recordings at different times of night or something, and then maybe that would at least help. But just a question that I don't think it can be answered right now, but be interested, which of the air pollutants are more of an issue for like deposition in the streams? And so I know that, in the past, been aware of some from, Midwest power plant emissions that have ended up, being responsible for levels in the entire Chesapeake Bay. But are there some things of, the particular air pollutants that might be, in addition to the problems for lungs and air, also more likely to be a problem in water? And that could be answered later, rather than going into the big thing right now.
Well, just a real quick answer. Yes, we can help with that. One of the key emissions that affects water quality is nitrogen oxide. Nitrogen oxide is part of the process that creates fine particulate and creates ozone, but reducing nitrogen oxide has significant benefits for water quality. And about 30% of the Bay's nitrogen problem originates from the air. So we can definitely talk to you about that. And on the idling piece, we have a new program, a couple years old, called Idle Free MD. It's up on our web page. It is mostly focused on reducing unnecessary idling at schools, but it does have a component that starts to look at trucks and buses. So take a look, and we can talk about this later, but it's something that, again, I'm very interested in diesel, and idling is a piece of the diesel problem.
Excellent. Well, I'll close us off there because we're at 10 after. And again, thank you very much to everyone on the call, and definitely happy to keep these communication channels open. And I look forward to being a part of, and at least listening in on a potential future Q&A session between MDE and the town. Anyone from the speaking side of the screen, if you want to give any kind of sign off, I'll let you do that, and then we can close out for the day.
This is Dave. I just want to let you know I posted a link to the Idle Free program in the chat box for y'all.
Yeah.
This is Layla Mayor Riazi, and what I wanted to say is thank you. This project has been long in coming and is absolutely been at the community level here in Cheverly, and all the support that your team, that Dr. Shakobi Wilson has provided. We continue to be very appreciative of that, and we're going to do our best to make sure that this is as robust of a local, hyper-local air quality monitoring project as possible. And am thrilled to hear how supportive MDE is of looking at the local level monitoring and finding ways to incorporate that into having wider reaching monitoring system throughout the state. So with that, think about this in everything that you do every day. And this is not about being against industrial development or against development overall. This is absolutely learning how to have responsible and responsive development that is absolutely supportive of our environmental health and well-being. Those things do not need to be in opposition. We have the technology as long as we have the will.
Well said.
Thank you. Take care, everyone.
All right. Have a great weekend.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.